In a world dominated by constant communication, endless sharing of information, and apparent openness, we have forgotten one of the most powerful tactics of human interaction: strategic silence. While everyone around is busy declaring their intentions, broadcasting thoughts, and revealing strategies, a truly effective player knows when to remain silent and uses that silence as a weapon. Niccolò Machiavelli, the Florentine philosopher and political theorist of the 16th century, understood this principle better than many, although he is known for his straightforward advice in impressive publications. His most profound insight concerns what should be left unsaid. "The crowd is always captivated by appearances," he wrote, "and by recognizing that speech creates an illusion while silence preserves reality, in an era of excessive revelation, those who master strategic silence do not just protect their positions. They achieve what those who constantly communicate cannot. They win while others are still discussing how to achieve victory." The cost of unnecessary words. Machiavelli lived in an era of political intrigue, where careless words could lead to exile or conspiracy. But even in our less perilous modern world, unnecessary words create vulnerabilities that silence avoids. People, in general, judge more by what they see than by what they feel, Machiavelli noted, for everyone can see, but few can truly feel. A person who constantly speaks gives everyone the opportunity to see and judge, while revealing little of what can be felt or understood. Every word you utter carries costs that silence is free from. First, speech creates obligation. When you declare your intentions, you bind yourself to them in the eyes of others. Changing course will make you appear inconsistent or insincere. By remaining silent about your plans, you preserve the freedom to adapt without explanations or apologies. Second, speech reveals your thought process and limitations. The more you explain, the more you disclose about how your mind works. This information can be used by others to predict, manipulate, or counter you. As Machiavelli pointed out, the first method of assessing a thinker is to study the people they surround themselves with. Similarly, the first method of evaluating a person's strategic abilities is to listen to how much they unnecessarily reveal. Third, and perhaps most importantly, incessant speech diminishes your mystery and authority. It is far safer to be feared than loved, a famous phrase by Machiavelli. Fear requires distance, and distance demands a certain degree of mystery. A leader who explains every decision, justifies every action, and shares every thought becomes commonplace, and the commonplace cannot command the same respect as the extraordinary. Consider how this manifests in a modern context. A colleague who speaks up at every meeting and weighs in on every issue, regardless of their expertise, gradually loses influence. A friend who shares every detail of their life on social media becomes predictable and, therefore, less interesting. A negotiator who fills awkward silences with chatter loses their position. A leader who reacts to every criticism legitimizes their critics while diminishing their own authority. Machiavelli would perceive our modern obsession with transparency and constant communication not as a manifestation of authenticity, but as a strategic mistake. It is a voluntary surrender of position that provides others with information without receiving an equivalent exchange in return. The third aspect is strategic silence. Machiavelli's silence is not merely the absence of speech. It is a deliberate communication strategy that takes various forms depending on the objective. Understanding these different types of silence reveals how this approach works in practice. The first type is silence for gathering information. A wise person does immediately what a fool does eventually, Machiavelli wrote. The fool speaks immediately, revealing their position without learning anything about others. The wise person, by remaining silent at first, allows others to reveal their thoughts, intentions, and weaknesses before deciding how to respond. This approach creates an asymmetrical informational advantage. While others share their thoughts, you gather valuable information without giving anything in return. In negotiations, this manifests in a powerful principle. Whoever speaks first loses. In relationships, it explains why those who listen more than they speak often have a better understanding of dynamics than those who constantly talk. In competitions, it is the reason why those who announce their strategies before executing them typically underestimate their capabilities. The second type is silence for reinforcing authority. Machiavelli understood that power partly depends on perception, and it can be strengthened through calculated restraint. The cunning must emulate both the fox and the lion. The lion cannot defend against traps, while the fox cannot defend against wolves. Part of the fox's cunning is knowing when speech diminishes rather than enhances authority. Silence that reinforces authority works because people naturally fill informational gaps with assumptions that often favor the silent party. When a leader speaks selectively, addressing only significant issues, every detail they mention gains greater weight. When someone responds to criticism only when it is truly necessary, rather than defending against every accusation, they project confidence rather than insecurity. This explains why the most influential figures in any field typically speak less, but more thoughtfully, than those lower in status. A nervous junior manager talks too much. A chief executive officer makes brief, decisive statements. An insecure person explains at length. A confident person asserts without justification. A restless leader responds to every provocation. A confident leader selectively engages in dialogue only when it is strategically advantageous. The third type is silence to maintain ambiguity. Since it is difficult to combine them, it is safer to be feared than loved when one of the two is absent, as Machiavelli advised. This well-known observation goes beyond fear and love and pertains to all situations where maintaining multiple interpretations serves strategic interests. Preserving uncertainty through silence allows others to project their own hopes, fears, and interpretations onto your position. By refusing to clarify, you can simultaneously address different groups with conflicting expectations. You maintain freedom of action, not tying yourself to specific interpretations. You retain the possibility of denial, not explicitly supporting any particular understanding. Politicians master this approach by making statements so vague that different audiences hear what they want to hear. Skilled negotiators use this by avoiding clear positions that would prematurely narrow possible agreements. Leaders apply this by formulating visions without limiting their implementation with unnecessary details. In each case, strategic silence is not deception. It is the realization that premature clarity often undermines the goals they promote. As Machiavelli noted, politics has nothing to do with morality. In his view, an effective strategy requires maintaining flexibility, which excessive communication could undermine. The psychological power of silence, in addition to its tactical advantages, has powerful psychological effects that speech cannot achieve. Understanding these effects explains why silence often succeeds where persuasion fails. First, silence creates space for projection. The human mind instinctively fills informational voids, often reflecting its own concerns about reality. When you remain silent at key moments, others project their fears, hopes, or assumptions onto that silence, revealing their position while you maintain yours. As Machiavelli noted, people are so simple and prone to immediate needs that a deceiver will never lack victims for their deceptions. The strategic use of silence leverages this tendency without requiring active deception. This explains why experienced researchers use silence. They ask questions to elicit information from reluctant subjects. The discomfort of silence compels a person to fill the void, often revealing more than direct questioning would. The same dynamic operates in negotiations, where the party that endures silence typically achieves better terms than the party nervously filling the air with concessions. Second, silence establishes dominance in the communication dynamic. The person who speaks first, or speaks the longest, often subtly positions themselves as someone seeking approval or recognition from listeners. The person who speaks less is more selective and only asserts themselves as a judge, rather than a supplicant, after others have taken their positions. Niccolo Machiavelli would undoubtedly recognize in this expression his principle that it is better to be feared than loved. Those who remain silent do not necessarily evoke love. However, their restraint often commands respect, which cannot be achieved through verbosity. This dynamic explains why job candidates who ask more questions often find greater success than those who talk more about themselves. It also explains why, in meetings, the quiet person is often taken more seriously than the loud participants. Additionally, it clarifies why, in conflicts, respectful silence often proves more effective than heated arguments. In each of these cases, silence alters the balance of power, overturning the usual pattern of seeking approval through speech. Thirdly, silence creates an aura of authenticity that enhances perceived power. As Machiavelli noted, people generally judge more by what they see than by what they touch, because everyone can see while only a few can truly feel. What cannot be fully seen or understood often appears more impressive than what is completely revealed. A person who lays bare all their thoughts, motives, beliefs, and plans becomes commonplace. Conversely, a person who selectively reveals information maintains an element of mystery that increases their perceived capabilities. Let us consider how this works in the context of leadership. A leader who explains every aspect of their thinking loses the mystery of their role and allows others to consider themselves equally capable. A leader who shares conclusions while keeping the thought process secret preserves an aura of intrigue that strengthens their authority. This is not about deception, but about understanding that leadership partly depends on how others perceive their abilities as surpassing their own. The dangerous allure of transparency. Modern culture often views transparency as an unconditional virtue and silence as suspicious. Be sincere, we are told. Share your truth. Communicate openly. However, these pieces of advice, while well-intentioned, contradict Machiavelli's strategic insights on power and influence. This promise was a necessity in the past. A broken word is a necessity in the present, Machiavelli wrote. I understand that tying oneself to past statements often undermines current interests. The modern fetishization of transparency demands precisely this kind of tying, a voluntary limitation of future actions in favor of current sincerity. This is not a call for dishonesty. Machiavelli's approach was not about lies, but about selective disclosure. Share what contributes to achieving goals and conceal what does not. Never attempt to win by force what can be won by deception, he advised. In modern terms, this could mean never try to win with excessive disclosure what can be won through strategic silence. The trap of transparency appears in many contexts. In a professional environment, there is sometimes a desire to share unfinished projects too early, to express half-formed opinions in meetings, or to reveal one's positions in negotiations without fully understanding the limitations of the other side. In personal relationships, this manifests as premature emotional revelations, unnecessary confessions of past mistakes, or detailed discussions of future plans that may still change. Machiavelli would consider such behavior inauthentic, a strategic mistake that relinquishes power without gaining proportional benefits. A transparent person becomes predictable, manageable, and mundane, which undermines and diminishes their influence. This perspective challenges modern communication norms that equate the volume of information with its value and openness with sincerity. A Machiavellian communicator speaks not to express themselves, but to achieve specific goals. They withhold information not to deceive, but to preserve opportunities. They remain silent not out of insecurity, but out of strategic discipline. How can Machiavelli's strategy of silence be applicable in a modern context? It is not about becoming completely mute, but about developing the discipline to speak only when it serves your goals better than silence. First and foremost, practice informational asymmetry. Before stating your position on any important issue, ensure that you first understand the positions of others. Ask questions rather than making statements. Listen to what is not said, not just what is explicitly stated. As Machiavelli advised, a lion cannot protect itself from traps, and a fox cannot protect itself from wolves, so one must be a fox to recognize traps, or a lion to scare off wolves. The cunning of the fox begins with gathering information while revealing almost nothing. This approach is particularly valuable in negotiations, where understanding the true limitations and priorities of the other side is often more important than articulating your own. It is also applicable in the workplace, where knowledge, concerns, motivations, and colleagues' positions prevent unnecessary conflicts and contribute to more effective influence. Secondly, develop strategic ambiguity when clarity may prematurely limit opportunities. This does not mean intentionally confusing others, but maintaining flexibility by avoiding unnecessary specifics. The prince must be very slow in belief and action, showing no fear as Machiavelli advised. This slowness in decision-making preserves the breadth of actions. In the context of leadership, this may mean formulating visions and goals, outlining details, and implementing adaptations. In personal relationships, this can imply expressing commitment to shared goals while maintaining flexibility regarding the specific paths to achieve them. In competitive situations, it means keeping your strategy secret while your rivals reveal theirs. Thirdly, develop comfort with silence as a position of strength. Most people perceive silence in conversation as something uncomfortable and rush to fill it, often revealing more than intended or making unnecessary concessions. If one learns to embrace these moments rather than fill them, it can provide a significant advantage. In negotiations, this is expressed by allowing silence to follow your statement without weakening it with nervous explanations. In conflicts, it manifests in the ability to fully listen to criticism before responding, rather than interrupting it with defense. In leadership, it translates into announcing decisions without unnecessary explanations, relying on the idea that the decision speaks for itself. Machiavelli's strategic silence does not imply that one should never speak. It acknowledges that one should only speak when words serve your goals better than silence. A master of this approach does not keep complete secrets, but creates a strategic contrast between what is revealed and what remains personal. The vulgar crowd is always deceived by appearances, Machiavelli noted, and the world is largely made up of the vulgar. In a world where most reveal everything, those who cultivate selective disclosure stand out. Their words carry more weight precisely because they are chosen more carefully. Their positions generate more interest because they are disclosed strategically, and their influence grows because it is applied more thoughtfully. This approach requires discipline, which is increasingly rare in modern society. It demands patience to listen before speaking, restraint to refrain from disclosure, even when it seems temporarily satisfying, and strategic understanding to recognize when silence serves better than words. These qualities do not develop naturally in a world that rewards constant self-expression, but precisely because they are rare, they create an advantage. The final paradox of Machiavelli's strategy of silence is that its most successful practitioners remain largely unnoticed. We notice the loud, expressive, and transparent, while the masters of strategic silence achieve their goals without drawing attention to their methods. They remain silent and win, while others still talk about victory. Perhaps this explains why Machiavelli himself, despite his immense influence on political theory and strategy, remains widely misunderstood. His name has become synonymous with ruthless manipulation. However, his ideas reveal a deeper understanding of human psychology and power dynamics that goes beyond mere ruthlessness. He understood that influence does not always require force or deception. Sometimes, it simply requires knowing when to remain silent and allow others to reveal themselves. In an era of information overload, filled with distractions and compulsive data exchange, the strategy of silence proposed by Machiavelli offers an unexpected path to influence. Speak less, observe more, reveal selectively, and let your results speak louder than your words. In the endless struggle for attention and power, those who master this approach do not merely participate, they prevail.